Welcome to the From Ignored to Restored workshop. Tonight, I'm going to be introducing you to the Bank Guest House, formerly just known as the Bank, built in 1919, and it's pictured here on the left, which is owned by Jody, who's pictured here in the center with her two pugs, Mr. Q on the left, I believe, and Mr. T on the right. And they're here with us tonight, so hopefully Jody will be able to answer some of your questions at Q&A a bit later. But here is a sneak peek over here on the far side of the screen of some of the finished product of the interior restoration. But to start us off, here is a bit about the history of the bank. So the bank actually stopped operating in 1991, and it largely stood overlooked for more than 2 decades before Jody purchased the building in 2025. There was a brief time in 2002 when it was a wine shop opened, but largely it didn't function as anything other than a house and was lived in by a couple from Gippsland originally. And I wonder, can you think of a time in your life where you've ever felt overlooked or ignored, perhaps a bit like this bank that has stood in the main street of all places, but hasn't functioned using its original purpose? Now, thankfully for the bank, it got a second chance at life, thanks to Jody. And she was able to purchase it in the end for $60,000 less than her original offer. It's an amazing story, and I hope she'll tell us a bit more about that after this teaching tonight. And she began the process of renovations. So Jody isn't a project manager. She had never done anything like this before. And one of the things that had to happen was the removal of pigeon poo from her roof. And so she was able to collect a full skip bin worth of pigeon poo during this process. That was just one of the jobs that had to happen. And as Jody was looking through the bank, she actually found 2 exquisite chandeliers discovered, unopened, in their packaging still, that had probably never really seen the light of day. And Jody had a vision for this and was able to give the bank a new lease on life. So I'll continue on. There are some before and after pictures here, which are quite amazing. So this is the messy middle of the renovation process. And it's kind of like how God works in us. Often, we might try to ignore certain parts of ourselves that try and bubble up to the surface. But if we allow him to do his work in us, he tends to go through this process of stripping us back to who we are at our core. And it's not necessarily comfortable. Oftentimes that's painful, and it can look very messy and can be very hard when you're in the middle of it to envision what good is going to come out of it at the end. But as we click along, this is the kitchenette today. So you can see very different when it's got some appliances in place and that beautiful exposed brick there. And then similarly, this is the bathroom that was renovated. You can see everything stripped back once again. And then Jody put in some beautiful fittings. You can't see it in this photo, but there's a gorgeous bath underneath this shower, and it's really just a gorgeous transformation. And now these are some of the bedrooms inside the Bank Guest House Airbnb. So this is the koala room, how it started and how it finished. As you can see, it's just been done up so gorgeously. And if we look a bit closer, this is the original light fitting on the roof, which was replaced and restored with one of those gorgeous chandeliers. And just look at the light in that photo. And then this is the Kanga room. So again, very plain, but this beautiful blank canvas that Jody could work with. And here is the end result. Again, the second chandelier hung in its rightful place in the Kanga room. And then this is the final room in the Airbnb. This is the B room during the renovation process. And then today, this is how it looks. So how amazing the transformations and renovations that took place. And at the end of all of this, there were just some beautiful restoration stories as I was talking to Jody. So the bank was actually originally in Jody's family line. So her grandfather, W.H. Crone, was in the line of this bank. And so when Jody purchased it, it was restored back to the family. And honestly, that's what God does with us, isn't it? Through Jesus, that, we're separate from him because of our sin, but because of Jesus, we are adopted into God's family. He purchases us back. And then we have the chandeliers that didn't really see the light of day, now producing beautiful light, now that they're used in their purpose that they were created for. And again, it's a bit like God with us, that when we are functioning in our purpose as he designed and as he intended, we can emit his beautiful light as well. And then, of course, the bee, the koala, and the kangaroo are functioning as an Airbnb, and previously they were just empty rooms that weren't used. And I think sometimes we think we can't be used, we've got nothing to offer, but God has a vision for our life, and he transforms us if we allow him into something that can be used for his glory, and he gives us a unique function and purpose in Christ. And then speaking of Christ, there are so many connections between this whole restoration process and Jesus. So much like the building was overlooked for more than 2 decades, we see Jesus, he sort of overlooked himself for the first 30 years of his life. So he's known as a carpenter, but his actual real purpose for being here is to go to the cross for us. But it's not until later that he's known as the Son of God, when his true identity is revealed. And interestingly enough, he spends years working with wooden materials. So you can imagine he's restoring lots of different things probably, and he knows the smell of wood, he knows the sound of the nails being banged into that wood, and this is all foreshadowing his death on a wooden cross. So there was actually purpose to him being a carpenter before he stepped into the public eye and claiming to be the Son of God. And then after his death, there's his resurrection. And actually, a lot of people don't notice or recognize him in his transformed resurrection body. And it's kind of like this building that, had you seen before pictures and after pictures, they're unrecognizable in between. And when we allow God to do his work in us, I think we can also become so transformed that people go, whoa, I almost didn't recognize you because you're not who I remember you to be. And then Yeah, I think we often hide our pain, our problems, our shame, hoping with time that it disappears. But God actually wants to use those messy parts of us, um, and our story so the world can encounter Jesus, just like we can encounter Jesus through the Bank Guest House and its transformation. God actually is not afraid to look at our broken, most inward parts and, um, yeah, do a renovation in our life that points others to Jesus. And ultimately, we are transformed when we understand how much God adores us. When we understand our true identity in Christ, that is when He can fashion us into a beautiful, restored masterpiece. And we're going to unpack this a bit further in our own lives using the Hurting Hoping framework, and a few discussion questions just after this.